Happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 288. No, that'd be a little bit high. Episode 228 for the 18th of August, 2021. My name is Wes Fryer. I'm coming to you from Oklahoma City, where we had our first day back with students and my first day to have my sixth grade advisees, and it's actually a lovely, cool evening. Took the dogs for a walk. Unfortunately, the water in our neighborhood got shut off about 8 o'clock, so we're hoping that's going to come back on. But otherwise, it is a great evening in central Oklahoma. So joining me as always, coming to us from the land of Missoula, Montana, and sometimes smoky summer, it's Dr. Jason Neiffer. Jason, how is life in Missoula tonight?
Well, it's rainy here, so we're quite thankful for that. It's been, in fact, it started raining late last evening, and it's been on and off today, and it's probably going to be on and off tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we're real excited about that, and hopefully bring us some relief from the fires. And I know that it smelled a lot nicer outside than it has in the last couple of weeks. But yes, indeed, I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, Montana State Virtual School, located right here in Missoula, Montana, on the beautiful University of Montana campus. But of course, we're not here to talk about the weather, although as a Montana, I love talking about the weather. But what is the EdTech Situation Room all about, Dr. Fryer?
We have compiled, as always, a list of links of technology-related news, and we've put all that on a Google Doc that you can access at edtechsr.com/links. Our categories tonight are Google, Microsoft, OKZoomer, security, podcasting, social media, crypto, and NFTs, and then, of course, our Geek of the Week. So, Dr. Neiffer, where would you like to begin tonight's discussion?
Well, let's start here. There are a couple of big headlines right now in security, and in fact, that's what we were talking a little bit about pre-show. So let's start there. This is more or less a warning that I'm sure almost every K-12 tech director in America it's already aware of, because it's been well covered in the technology media. But PC Magazine reported on August 14th that ransomware campaigns are continuing to exploit the so-called print nightmare, which is the vulnerability in Windows operating systems with the print spooler. And this has been around for a while, and I look back, I think we had an article on this a couple weeks back, but we didn't talk about it. But there is a set of vulnerabilities in the print spooler. That's the software that basically communicates between your computer and your printer to kind of gather up print jobs and then send them off to a printer for printing purposes. And as it turns out, there's been a long time vulnerability there that was finally found and has been exploited by a number of hackers, including ransomware attack hackers. And the particular PC Magazine article talks about part of the problem with dealing with this particular piece of software is that you have to disable the print spooler to be totally protected. But of course, that means you can't print then. And while printing is a lot less than it used to be, my guess is in the typical school, the printer is still a well-used piece of machinery across the landscape of K-12. So Microsoft continues to, I think they have a patch out for the original version of the exploit. Then the exploit is... there's been other things exploit in the print spooler, so it's been kind of an ongoing issue for the past 4 weeks or so. But in case you are a tech director or you are a very part-time tech director, which is also the case in a lot of cases, I just want to make our audience aware.
You know, among many things, I'm thankful for not having that responsibility at our school anymore. It's interesting, we have moved to Chrome entirely for students at the middle school level. I know Chrome. We were running prints. We were running Google Cloud Print, but we were needing to do it on legacy devices, and so we were running, installing printers on Windows servers that would then connect to Cloud Print. And anyway, this doesn't address Cloud Print, but it does remind me of that and I don't know what Google's done as a replacement for that. But I would just say we all need to move forward into the 21st century with printing. Paper cut was one of the platforms we were trying to implement. In fact, our local blood bank, the Oklahoma Blood Institute, they have nice little signs up by their printers, that they're using paper cut, and you scan in and put in your code to, print and whatever like that. So I have not heard about, local folks being affected by that. But I will say, on the topic of printing, I don't think we had gotten a printer for maybe 10 years or something. And I talked to my in-laws, and we've picked up a HP printer with this subscription ink thing, and we have 4 months free. We can print like 700 pages in color per month for like the next 4 months, and then we're like $5 a month or something. So anyway, it's printing is with us. We're not able to abandon it entirely, but it's ransomware is continues to be a huge threat, not only for hospitals and all kinds of enterprises, but schools as well. And phishing and social engineering attacks continue to be the primary vector where folks are getting inside your network and being able to, do these bad things. So I'm glad to be out of that business, but happy to pass along the news and encourage folks to, take care and make sure that whoever is responsible is aware of those threats. So this is where, outsourced services and things like that can be really beneficial for folks who are, perhaps not juggling as many balls and being able to stay laser focused on, certain things like that. So I don't know how many people are doing that for their printing services, but it would be good to be able to bring, professionals to bear on. Well, we're all professionals here, but anyway, a contracted, entity, possibly for some of that kind of stuff. So I'll say one last thought is everyone needs a ransomware plan, right? We had just developed some of that, in concert with one of our insurance folks, and, what kind of a plan would we have if we have this kind of attack? Do we know, our course of action of what we do? It really is something important for every organization to plan for, just like you would for other kinds of contingencies. So,
absolutely. And then I know that I think we both shared an article here, but why don't you talk about what's going on at our friends at T-Mobile?
Yeah, so this is something that came out as a rumor and then has been confirmed by T-Mobile. Jason dropped in the Verge article, T-Mobile investigating report of customer data breach that reportedly involves 100 million people. And then that was from August 15th. And then I dropped in the Engadget article from today that is a confirmation from T-Mobile. T-Mobile confirms data breach affects over 47 million people. So I think in the article that I dropped in, we were just talking pre-show, like, what are we going to do? Are you going to do something here? You have a variety of options when you believe, if, for instance, that let's say your social security number and your phone number are breached. The way that this came out actually was a individual on the dark web was talking about selling 30 or 40 million customer data sets or whatever with socials and phone numbers and everything. And I think they were asking something like it was in pounds, but it was the equivalent of like $200,000 or $300,000. Anyway, you can do a fraud alert. You can go all the way up to a freeze, and some of those things can involve some cost. The freeze, I think, is supposed to be free, but it's harder to undo. And we were talking about that the fraud alert requires extra levels of identification if somebody's going to, draw out credit or ask for credit in your name. So some people will say in today's day and age, that's just something smart to do. If you're not going to be getting credit for something, then freeze your credit, because you don't want someone to, take out credit and have to clean up that mess. And it's been probably almost 20 years, but we had a friend in Lubbock, until her daughter, I think, went to college, and then for whatever reason, because of furniture or car or something, she finally applied for credit and was like, oh, well, your credit is terrible because you took this out several years ago and never paid it back. And they're like, what was that? And they had no idea that this had happened. So what are your thoughts, Dr. Neiffer? Is this Chicken Little, or do T-Mobile customers need to really pay attention here?
Well, I know that it's kind of breaking news that T-Mobile is confirming the situation. This was a rumor. I believe it was as recently, or I'm sorry, as late as Sunday. I believe is when I was reading that this may have been a factor. But I mean, I'd like to say it's a reality of the 21st century in the way data is stored. But the bottom line is that, I mean, how many truly terrible things have happened in the last 10 years related to personal data being stolen. And in the case of something like T-Mobile, there's just no excuse. You're a massive size corporation with tens of millions of customers, and it's it's unexcusable, not to have top flight security. So I'm assuming we'll get to know more about this, right? And no system at least yet is 100% secure, but it's important to think about.
That's what I was going to say. Is there's a huge target on the back of every
Yeah.
internet service provider and someone like that who has literally millions and millions of customer information. And one of the dangers, and I don't know if we've got this article in here, we've been talking about two-factor authentication and some of the risks and things like that of using text messaging. And one of the reports was saying that the IMEI number, I think that's right, that you have for your devices, as well as your phone numbers and all this information. I mean, if folks have that critical information, they very well might be able to call in and, say, hey, I've changed my cell phone. Can you swap my SIM card? And then be able to, whatever that's called, SIM hack you, and they're then able to verify your account information and get access to perhaps your Gmail account, whatever your primary email account is, and then they're off to the races. So I think it's a sign of the times, of course, but it's also a sign that nothing is really unhackable. And depending upon how many resources that an entity has, whether that's a nation state or a criminal group or whatever, it is possible to penetrate, and it's possible to compromise just about any system that's out there. The article that I put in from Engadget notes that this is the third such attack that T-Mobile has suffered in the past 2 years. So Peggy had mentioned, I think, switching to T-Mobile a few months back. I mean, I love T-Mobile. I'm happy with them. But it probably is the kind of thing that, in addition to having our password managers and auditing our accounts and trying to make sure everything has a unique and long and complex password, we've got two-factor turned on. We also have our credit frozen, or a fraud alert at least put on. I don't know that we need to be spending money. The freeze by federal law, I was reading, is supposed to be free. There are some things that the credit agencies can charge you for. T-Mobile is promising affected customers, as they typically do, 2 free years of McAfee's ID theft protection service. They are recommending everyone changes their PIN number, and they're also going to set up an online resource page. So perhaps by the time we publish this site, that page will be up, and we'll also link that. But whether you're a T-Mobile customer or not, have I been pwned, right? Go to that site, take a look at the passwords that have been compromised. Certainly compromises that involve social security numbers, phone numbers, dates of birth, though that's just sort of the, key vital information that we have for ourselves. So it is, I think, not something to be ignored. And, even better, be proactive. If you're not a T-Mobile customer, fine. Be proactive and consider, if you're not going to be using credit in the next few months, maybe a good idea to put a credit freeze on there. But if you are a T-Mobile customer, it sounds like fraud alert at a minimum would be a wise thing to do.
Yep. And I shared a link in our show notes that we'll put in the, in the documents we'll put in our show notes from the Federal Trade Commission about what to know about credit freezes and fraud alerts. And it kind of goes through the different levels, the difference between a credit freeze and a fraud alert. And there's also an extended fraud alert you can do too.
Yep.
And it tells you how to do it. In the case of credit freeze, you have to contact all 3 credit bureaus: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. The fraud alert, you can just contact one of the 3. You don't have to contact all 3 because they contact each other. that it makes it harder for someone to open up a new line of credit.
And Peggy's asking about the connection between freezing your credit and the T-Mobile hack. So supposedly part of the T-Mobile hack is your social security number. And so using your social security number with your date of birth, with your address, folks can try to take out credit. And many times people do. So as a proactive step to prevent identity theft or stop identity theft, which may be tied to this T-Mobile hack, of course, it could be tied to something else. It's a wise, proactive thing to do to put a freeze on your credit so that the bad guys will not try to take out credit in your name, which, of course, they would have no intention of paying back. And, that's identity theft. And so this would be a proactive step to try to prevent identity theft and stave it off. So, and the fact that T-Mobile's saying right now, change your PIN number. Hey, we should all do that, right? If you're a T-Mobile customer, time to change your PIN. And the PIN is, one of those extra pieces of information that they ask for in order to access your account and then to make changes to your account. So Peggy's asking if it affects your credit rating. I don't think it does in terms of putting a fraud alert or a freeze on it, but I don't know. I'm not an expert. But I would say that the benefits of preventing a identity theft act where somebody's taking credit out on your name is going to be worth a penalty if it's available. But I haven't actually ever heard of that. I know when you have inquiries on your credit that can, just like taking credit out, affect your credit score. But I have never heard of putting a fraud alert or a freeze affecting your credit.
Right. And I'm putting a which one did I go with here? I am putting a freeze on my credit right now. So
yeah, there you go.
As a T-Mobile customer, and we'll see what this looks like. And I imagine there are many, many, many details to come. But yeah, pretty huge bummer.
If you're not in the midst of buying a house, buying a car, taking out credit for something, then it's probably not going to be an inconvenience to you at all. Peggy's asking if the PIN number is different than the password. Yes, you use your email and password to get access to your account, and usually they'll two-factor, authenticate you as well. But the PIN code is I think a numeric code always, and that's one that you'll just give as you access your account when you call in. Usually they'll say, "What's your PIN?" So there are multiple PINs. The phone can have obviously a passcode as far as getting past the lock screen, and there could be other pins, but this is the carrier pin that is your account pin, and it's one that generally, I've just given it verbally when I call in to make an account change or access my account. Good questions, and it's good to have Peggy with us live. Let's see. I think we had another security article. Oh, you just put the FTC in there. That's great. You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, that's just the differences between fraud alerts and credit alerts. So we can share this link in our show notes. But in case you're curious about that topic, the FTC's got an excellent document for kind of determining the difference between the two.
Very good. So here you go. No need to listen to Dave Ramsey, folks. You can just come here to the EdTech Situation Room. We're going to talk to you about cryptocurrency and your investment strategy following the Neiffer method, which only involves Dogecoin.
Yeah.
And on that note, actually, why don't I just skip to probably one of the weirder, two that I put under I was going to just do miscellaneous, but I put them under crypto and NFTs. So let's do the crypto one first. So podcast I've subscribed to for a while and enjoy periodically is called The Open Mind, hosted by Alexander Hefner. And the August 9th episode is an interview with Cornell trade economist Eswar Prasad, who is also an author and has published a book about cryptocurrency. And it is absolutely fantastic. It's about 30 minutes long. I don't think, and I don't actually know because I'm not talking to economics teachers, regularly, but I'd be very curious to know how much cryptocurrency figures into economics courses that we're teaching at the high school or the college level these days. It is really important to talk about crypto because it's been emergent and it's now a force, and the billions of dollars at least, I don't know if it's trillions, but the billions of dollars at least that are represented by different cryptocurrencies is quite staggering. I think it's fascinating also just to think about what money is and how money is whatever somebody says it is that people trust, that enough people trust in order to give it value. I think back to probably 2011 when I was in Shanghai. I delayed my departure because we got done on September 10th and thought, probably not a great idea to fly on September 11th or whatever, just being cautious. And I got to tour the Shanghai Museum that has an amazing exhibit all about Chinese currency and how they used to use like forks and silverware and you know, different things. And anyway, it's just fascinating currencies. And as they talk about in this podcast episode, you know, it wasn't that long ago that central banks stepped in, because we used to have lots of different regional states and things that would print currency. And anyway, central banks and this idea of regulating things from a central standpoint is relatively new. So that is an excellent article. And then the other one under this category that's kind of just bizarro weird is a Motherboard article from August 17th. And the headline is "Free clip art of a cartoon rock is selling for $300,000 as an NFT." And we have talked a little bit about an NFT. It's basically a digital license to say I own this thing digitally. And so, again, kind of like Dogecoin that we've talked about, that started off as a joke. Somebody decided to kind of make an NFT as a joke using this free clip art of a rock. And they've got like 100 different ones with different shadings and colors. And so they've had 581 Ether Rock transactions in the last 2 weeks. The current highest price paid for one was 96. Is it Ethereum's or is it Ether? I guess
Ethereum.
Ethereum, yeah. And
Yeah.
so the listed price for a single one is it's equivalent to $300,000 today. So, Dr. Neiffer, would you like to share any updates on from your seat of Dogecoin ownership? Any thoughts? And then would you like to be investing in a cartoon rock as an NFT soon, if there's still a chance?
I still don't understand NFTs. I'm gonna have to admit that one. Like, I kind of get it if you own all the rights to an image, that if it ever gets used, you get money back for it. But the problem is that that's the way it's supposed to work anyways, right? Like, that's the way, legitimate use of images work. So I will have to see. And I know some smart people. In fact, a brilliant former student of mine just finished up her master's degree, and she worked on a marketing project related to cryptocurrencies. And her master's degree is in branding, and she is an artist. So I'm hoping at some point that Ms. Carlson, my former student, can explain this to me a little better, because I'm not sure if I get it yet. But I have dabbled in cryptocurrency investments, mostly for the joke. I'm invested in Dogecoin, and so far the return has been nothing short of extraordinary. But I didn't put much money into it, and it's not a ton of money now, but a lot more than I started with. And if it ever ends up turning into $60,000 a bit like Bitcoin is per coin, I'll be doing pretty well. But the point is that I think you make an important note about how all currencies are fake, because we give them artificial value. And any teacher that's run a token economy in their classroom has essentially created their own currency inside of a classroom. I can remember at least 2 elementary school teachers that ran token economies. This is back in the 1980s, when that notion became very popular as a classroom management tool. And you've created a fake economy with fake currency that had real value to the people that were participating in the economy. And so that's an important thing to remember. But I don't know where this is going. The government's trying to regulate. In fact, part of, I think it was the initial traditional stimulus bill that's currently being considered by the House of Representatives, includes taxation and regulation on cryptocurrencies. And I don't think you should regulated any more or less than you would any other currency, and they certainly at some point cryptocurrencies were just straight up considered illegal. So it's progress that these markets can exist, but it's something to keep an eye on, and you never know what the future is. But from my very initial look into cryptocurrencies, it seemed awfully interesting, and also a lot of advantages to it as a model.
It definitely highlights the importance of not forgetting your password, because if you lose that, there's nobody to call, right? There is no central bank to call. There's you're on your own, and people have done that, right? There's folks that have lost millions of dollars in Bitcoin, and because their hard drive crashed or whatever, and they didn't have a backup. The one thing I'd say on NFTs is it just seems to me to be like artwork, right? I mean, who says the Mona Lisa should be worth this much, or this different piece of art has this value? It's really sort of the eye of the beholder, and then the perception of the marketplace, and what people are willing to pay for it. So it's really, really bizarre. It seems like NFTs have allowed some people to really realize some remarkable income, where they would have not ever thought the marketplace was going to be able to give them that. So, but I don't know, man. It is a weird thing, and that's probably one of those, like, if you ask the person on the street, I mean, I don't think you're going to have a very high percentage of people who are going to be, oh yes, let me tell you about NFTs. I understand them completely, and let me, in fact, I own some, and let me tell you about them. I mean, it's a really, really fringe thing, but the sums that we're talking about here are substantial. So I guess some people just have a lot of disposable income, Jason. So maybe that's the bottom line. And so they do wild things.
Yeah, it can do wild things. Yeah, and and by the way, there are hundreds of cryptocurrencies. Dogecoin is maybe considered one of the 10 or 20 most popular of them, but you've probably heard of Bitcoin. But there's Ethereum, which you mentioned, SafeMoon. There's I believe there's alternatives to Bitcoin, Dogecoin called Dogcoin, right? So there's just a lot of things out there. And remember, Dogecoin was started as a joke. That's the other thing to note about Dogecoin, is that it was started as a joke to make fun of Bitcoin, and now they're worth 32 cents a coin.
And so was the free clip art of the cartoon Rock.
Yeah.
One more thing to note about this, it's the role of influencers, having, I think wasn't it Elon Musk that talked about Dogecoin that helped push that up?
Yeah.
And so celebrities and different influencers play a huge role in these things. And now, like with cryptocurrency, there's so many different options, and they're trying to, emerge from the pack. It's pretty fascinating to see how important influencers are. And that does remind me, that is a lesson which I'm hoping to do early, at least with my sixth graders, maybe my fifth graders, to just find out a little bit about the influencers in their lives, the kinds of products that they talk about, and raise awareness of the influence that they have. Because probably there's a lot of these influencers that our teenagers are watching and listening to that we as adults have absolutely no idea who they are, what they're saying, what they're promoting. And it turns out that if, some of them that are big enough promote a cryptocurrency or promote an NFT, oh my gosh, it suddenly, has tons of value. So anyway, that may not have immediate impact on our lives as educators, but it's certainly a sign of a digital economy, a digital culture, and a pretty different world in some respects than, now we'll just start sounding very old talking about the old days, but.
Yep. True, but still fun to talk about.
Still fun to talk about. Okay, so you put a couple Google articles in there. I'd love, though, to hear about this Apple one about podcasting subscriptions. We talked about that a few weeks ago. I guess it's not going well.
Yeah, so The Verge reported today that there's been a lot of implementation issues regarding Apple's new attempt to create kind of an economy for podcasters by allowing you to get a subscription to a podcast via Apple's podcast service. And it was all part of a larger expansion of Apple's interest in podcast, as podcasting continues to grow extraordinarily in the vast media marketplace. But I guess the thing here that I thought was interesting was that the software is pretty buggy, is my understand. is my understanding. The software itself is kind of a mess, and the interface isn't very good. But I also thought what was interesting, especially in light of the fact that both Wes and I know a guy that co-runs a podcast, right? So as podcasters, we have relatively few duties to be able to release this. Wes has got a good workflow. He does all the technical stuff on our podcast. I'm guessing he probably takes about an hour or so a week. Plus, we obviously have the research time for links, and then the actual hour we're recording the podcast. But that's about what it takes to do that. But a lot of smaller podcasts that I guess are more commercially oriented than our podcast are finding that to get your podcast out there on all platforms, the simplicity of the RSS feed, which is the technology that helped create podcasting, an automated way of announcing to software devices that new content was available, they're not RSS compatible. So if you want it on Apple and want to charge for it, you got to upload it to their servers and in their service and in their interface. And then if you want it on Spotify, you have to go to their interface and you have to upload it there to get it to feed into there. Now, my understanding is that at least the way we do it and how we host our podcast, which I believe is on the Amazon cloud, that's right. Yeah. And Wes has got something that he's rigged together to make sure this all works. But eventually Spotify found ours, right? And eventually Apple found ours as we put it in various directories to share. But those that really rely on a consistent release and making sure that perhaps they're pulling from advertising servers, that it's turning into a pain to make sure it gets on all the platforms so they can appropriately monetize the site. And so, anyone could podcast. That's true. And if anything, our podcast is evidence of this, right? We're a couple of guys that can release to a global audience via some pretty easy to access technologies. But the bottom line is this has become a business for a lot of folks, and the engagement time to produce is expanding.
For the record, we use the Podlove podcasting plugin for WordPress. I'll drop the link in there. And it's kind of crazy. That article talks about, small teams. I guess there's been lots of processing time required and then errors where it just doesn't show up, and on Apple side. And this is a tendency I think we've seen with certainly the news, information landscape or ecosystem, and we're seeing it with podcasting. And it's the move to a fractured world where Spotify has their, platform, and Apple has their platform, and I guess Patreon, these different places, and wanting you to upload. So I don't remember, it was a couple of weeks ago, I think, where you had that article about sort of like the day the good web died or something like that. I read that article afterwards, and thinking about RSS, thinking about Google Reader, maybe these are technologies that still can live on. The web has in some ways, or maybe in many ways, been hijacked by corporations, right? Hijacked by, Facebook and surveillance capitalism companies that are cashing in on the data that we're willing to share, when we use these free tools. I really do lament the demise of RSS and Google Reader and those kinds of things, because they just allowed for such a free flow of information, but it didn't have the gatekeepers, and it didn't have the advertising, and it didn't have a lot of the things that some people would argue is allowing for monetization and that kind of thing. China has a very different environment for podcasting. We talked about this weeks ago, but they evidently did not start out as a free ecosystem for podcasting. It's always been a paid situation, and podcasting is really doing well there, but it's all coming from a frame of paying and subscribing, and not having free access. So Peggy's asking in the chat why, small teams would choose to use the Apple podcast. I'm sure people are asking that, but I mean, Apple is huge, right? And again, thinking about influencers, Apple's a huge influencer. And if your podcast can be featured, I mean, back in the day, mid to late 2000s, I started my podcast, back in 2005. I mean, my Moving at the Speed of Creativity podcast was one of the top educational technology podcasts. Guess what? There weren't that many, but that was really cool and really, really amazing. And I actually need to revisit that, because I have not taken that podcast down, but somehow it it got broken with Apple, and I have it's like one of these things that I do every once in a while, and I'll spend some time at it, and then I'll have to go off and do something else, and it hasn't been resolved. But my registration for my original Speed of Creativity podcast is broken with Apple. So, I'm not losing sleep over it, and I only have put up a podcast probably every month or so. It's not, this is the regular podcast for me. But anyway, it's hopefully Apple is going to work through these issues, and folks are going to be able to monetize their content. But we've seen lots of attempts. I think, Patreon and Substack are two areas right now and then YouTube, where creators are having a lot of success. I'm sure there's other areas as well, but, I don't know. We're still not dabbling in advertising. And frankly, the little dabbling I did in that was just, somebody asked me the other day about affiliate links in Amazon. It's like, yes, could I do those? Okay. Is that going to bring in much money? No. It's just a really, really small amount of money. So it's honestly pretty fun and liberating to just not have to worry about, messing with all of that. We appreciate those of you who listen to the show, and hope that we bring you some value in filtering the news and talking about it. But honestly, Jason and I just kind of like meeting every week for an hour. So just so happens that, it's fun to share it out as well. But
if we were in the same town, there would be a glass of beer involved. But since we're a distance, it involves a couple of cameras and some microphones.
The distance could be reduced, so there'll probably be an announcement made on the show here in the next month or so of a quest that may involve some change in venue for at least one co-host. So. Not to just totally give it away there, but
ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fryer is going to space. So
that's right.
Elon Musk has
called. That's right. I'm not going with Blue Origin. I'm gonna choose SpaceX. So I don't think my physique is quite astronaut approved.
Mine's definitely not. So
all right. Well, hey, I'm glad we did that Apple article.
Yeah.
We definitely need. Let's see. We got about 20 minutes. I think we definitely need to talk about some of these social media articles.
Yeah.
So would you like to start with that Facebook one that you put?
I would. I've spent 20 minutes reading this article, so I'm by no means an expert of it. And by article, I mean a report. But I didn't realize that Facebook, until I had read about this, had a transparency site. But you go to transparency.fb.com. It does provide a lot of data as part of their transparency. And the particular link I'm sharing is the Q2 2021 widely viewed content report, what people see on Facebook. And the reason why I want to share this is that, and I'm sure that this is in part the point of Facebook sharing this data, but for all the hand-wringing we do about Facebook, and maybe I'm playing into their argument, most of the stuff shared on Facebook is still banality, right? And delightfully so, right? It's things like, share a picture of you, graduating from high school, or the first 3 words you see are your reality, and please don't settle this debate. Does sugar go in spaghetti? Like that kind of content all across the way. And in fact, the only reference to politics I saw in the top 10 was sharing a tweet that Joe Biden had shared about the first 100 days. I'm sure it sparked a lot of conversation in both directions. But it is interesting that Facebook is releasing this data, and in part, maybe the reason they're releasing this data is because they're looking to build a bit of a narrative that, for all the hand-wringing people do about Facebook, and that includes me for certain, and I have a certain disgust with Facebook too, the vast majority of stuff has to do with just day-to-day random banter between people. So
there's a graph, and I have not read the article yet. I was just scanning it, but a very interesting graph it has is the source of newsfeed content views in the United States. And over half, 57%, are from posts that friends and people followed. About a fifth, 20%, 19.3, is from groups that people joined. And then there's also pages. But this is also a real sign of the times, right? There's so many people that still do watch mainstream media, mainstream news. I mean, that has a large following, but I would actually, I don't know that this report will do that, but I'd like to see a comparison of how many people are primarily social media sourced news consumers, and then how many people are, still television or newspaper or print media or some, more traditional news media. It'd also be interesting to know how this has changed since we've had, someone else move into the White House. I mean, it was incredible to see how much discussion there was about Twitter and tweets, in the 4 years of the Trump administration. That's definitely, gone down. But yeah, I very interested in this too, and that looks like a great report to look at. I put an article related here a little bit from Yale News, but this was a research paper that just came out, published by some scholars at Yale University, and it was from August the 13th. Likes and shares teach people to express more outrage online. And so not only were they in this study looking at social media posts that people are just organically, voluntarily creating and putting out there, but there was some controlled experimentation in terms of looking at how people would respond. And so I'll read a little bit from the end of the study. It says that our studies find that people with politically moderate friends and followers are more sensitive to social feedback, meaning do they get likes, do they get shares, do they get comments. It says this suggests a mechanism for how moderate groups can become politically radicalized over time. The rewards of social media create a positive feedback loop that exacerbates outrage. And it says that it doesn't say whether that's positive or negative, but it does show that social media's business model, which optimizes for user engagement, amplification of moral outrage is a clear consequence. And so this ties to things we've talked about a lot under the title of the tech correction. We've talked about the Netflix series, or not series, the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, which came out last fall. And to share one other related article, and then we'll toss it to you. I listened to a great interview with Roger McNamee. Roger McNamee is the author of the book Zucked. He is the investment guy who was the counselor of Mark Zuckerberg, counseling him to not sell to Yahoo for $1 billion and how he could structure the business so that he could maintain control. He's the one that brought Sheryl Sandberg over from Google to Facebook. And so this podcast interview was on a podcast called The Sunday Show. This was from August the 15th. I have not read his book, Zucked, but one of the biggest things that he is investing his time with, and he's partnered with Tristan Harris at the Center for Humane Technology, is that the design of Facebook and the design of many social media platforms is to focus on outrage and fear. And we are just wired as human beings to respond to these things, right? It's the reptilian brain that kicks in. We feel we're threatened. We have these emotional responses. And so, that article, the research report that you just referenced, this Yale report, they point to a key fundamental foundational part of the surveillance capitalism economy that we live in. And that is that these social media companies have been able to create products which optimize for engagement, and they find that content that we get emotional about, that we fear, that we're outraged about, that kind of content is the stuff that we just basically can't help but look at and think about and click on and share. And that is driving a tremendous profits for these companies, but it also has a lot of other implications for our society, and especially for this idea that we're, very polarized, and we're also having different perceptions of facts today. And that begs the question of whether a representative democracy can continue to function as it should, when large swaths of people, for instance, disagree on who won or lost an election. And we're living in that time right now. So your thoughts, Dr. Neiffer?
Yeah, I so many of them I might not be able to articulate one super clearly, but one thing to remember is that, and we talked about this. Actually, this was a topic we talked about several times in the early days of our podcast. But remember, these technologies come with a design that is intended to hack your brain a little bit, right? And that understanding, I think, is so important that the same psychology that goes into making Vegas gambling machines addictive also makes social media and games and other connection technologies quite addictive. It's essentially used the notion of gamification, which is something that a lot of educators hear a lot about, and pulling those technologies to engage you in a way that maybe you're not all that interested in being engaged. And I think that's something to be extremely cognizant about, but also, and I don't know, maybe these conversations about technology go on in classrooms, but if you're not, and it doesn't really matter what you're teaching or who you're teaching, I think you as an adult, a savvy adult, owe it to your kiddos to start making these into important classroom conversations, because I still think this technology is, I'm still amazed by it every single day and the cool things that we've built with this technology. But it doesn't mean there's not cost to it, and it doesn't mean that power can be used for something other than awesomeness.
One more article under the social media heading. This was NBC News on August 11th. As vaccine mandates spread, protests follow, some spurred by nurses. And there are specific references here to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Again, this amplification dynamic. And what they're saying is, across the whole spectrum of healthcare providers, we don't have this critical mass of nurses and doctors that are all anti-vax, but there are some.
Yeah.
And what happens whenever one of those people seem to be vocal against vaccinations specifically is that gets amplified hugely by the anti-vax community. And so there is an outsized amplification of those voices. And those people are, the anti-vaxxers are then using the veneer of credibility and medical authority that comes with, I'm a nurse, I work in a hospital. There was a term here that I hadn't heard before that talked about the alignment of their when they post those. Let me see if I can find that. And it basically just means that they're amplifying for the purpose of they're having an alignment in their views. And anyway, I'll have to try to find that. But again, platforms are trying to address this. It says TikTok is trying to limit the spread of misinformation, but the app is a huge outlet for people who are pushing agendas, including the anti-vax agenda. And so this is one of the things that Robert is it McAfee, the author of Zucked, one of the things that he says, McNamee, is, our attention span with media tends to be very limited. And so we had a lot of attention with the documentary coming out, and there were conversations with members of Congress, et cetera, last fall. But we've seen, some of that sort of peter out. So will there be legislation for the tech correction? Will there be, some kind of privacy law, for instance, in the United States, like we've seen the GDPR in Europe? There doesn't seem to be, as much media focus today and as much of a groundswell of support. But there are folks that are working for this. The Center for Humane Technology is still at work. And, it's just the forces arrayed against them are huge. They're formidable, right? It's, Facebook, it's Google, it's Amazon. We're hearing about lawsuits and things like that are being filed, but it doesn't seem to me like we're imminently on the edge of having some kind of earth-shaking, ground-changing regulation that's going to address this. So yeah, we need to keep talking about it with our kids, talking about how folks are hacking our minds, thinking about the choices that we're making, and just, we shouldn't give up, but it appears that these systems themselves, as we've just mentioned, are engineered and designed in ways that really, media literacy education can't defeat because the underlying psychologies of just the human brain and what we want to pay attention to and what we just can't help, paying attention to, it's just designed to maximize that. Peggy's mentioning in the chat, it's upsetting to see healthcare providers refusing to get vaccinated, promoting their position, and it is, and that's just again, it's one of these things where the outliers can have an outsized voice, and we certainly see that. But not that we need to go down the COVID hole, but our hospitals are maxed out here in Oklahoma. One of our science teachers just had a relative, go to the ER, and we're at the same levels of the highest hospitalization beds, ICU beds being utilized in January, February. We're there now, and we're just going to keep on going up, they said, into early September. So it is a tough time. And we're back to school today. We're taking precautions. We're wearing masks, but it's just as uncertain this fall, I feel like, in terms of what lies ahead as we felt last fall. So all right, well, lift us up with some positive tech news, Dr. Neiffer. Do you have any good? I think there's some good Google news in here and some other stuff. So
there's 4 quick kind of more hard tech articles that we can go through at 90 seconds apiece or so. Paul Thurrott reported on Thurrott.com on August 9th that Google is building a campus just for hardware. And the reason why I want to mention that is because I think you've seen this a lot in Microsoft, but the age-old notion that a company making everything, including the hardware plus the software stack, leads to some magical things. And I think that's one of the reasons why Apple has had so much success over time, is because they don't design to a mass audience with their software. They design only to their own hardware. And I think Microsoft figured that out too, that in my humble opinion, the experience in the newest versions of Windows is better on Microsoft hardware than it is on almost any other hardware platform. And if Google's getting into that business, they already make their own phones, and they also make a Chromebook every year and a half or so. But if they start doing that more expansively, or make different form factors of Chromebooks, or additional form factors of phones, I think that's great for the market.
I think those folks will be working in the office. We talked last week about this fight that's been happening in many tech companies today between remote, the desire for workers to remain remote, and, desire for companies to say, hey, we've got these facilities, we need to put people in them. So in producing hardware, I don't think that is going to be something, unless, robot technology is, anyway, we're away from that, where I think we're going to be able to do that kind of work as effectively remotely as we could in person. So that is exciting, because competition is good, and let's see Google continue to innovate. It mentions in the article the purchase of, I think, HTC, and then with Nest, we're continuing to invest in our family in the Google ecosystem, and have been pretty happy with those products. And I'm excited to hopefully see them continue to improve, because honestly, Siri's not doing it for me. So I still have to use Siri, but anyway, Google Assistant is the one I go to whenever I can.
Yep. Okay, 2 quick video conferencing articles. The first one is Engadget reported on August 13th that Google Meet moderation will be easier, because now you can have up to 25 co-hosts. So in other words, if you're running a large meeting, or even a meeting where you want other people to have hosting duties, one of the reasons why I like to have multiple people have hosting duties is in case my connection is unstable and I have to drop out of the meeting, and sometimes it'll close a meeting down if you don't have a co-host there. But it's always good, I think, plan for contingencies. And then the other video conferencing news, Zoom is releasing something called Focus Mode, which is kind of a tool made for the classroom. But basically, it allows you to say that students can see you, and they can see themselves, and they can see what you're sharing, but they can't see anyone else. So there's less incentive, for kids to be silly in Zoom windows as part of that process. Now, I have to say that, I can imagine using that and finding use to that. I think you have to balance that with, I do think, the humanness of having 25 faces, Brady Bunch style in your window, I think is very important for human connection purposes. But I could see effortlessly flowing in and out of this, assuming it's just a click away, I think would be a really interesting way to help change focus and do good things you would do in the classroom to help transition from one activity to another.
Well, I will say a lot of the announcements that we've heard Google make, the changes they've made, and if you haven't checked out Meet in the last month or even few weeks, there's some really, really good updates. But I think they're continuing to kind of Zoomify a little bit. But some of those things with co-hosts and I mean, there's been some real frustrating things that can be frustrating. So glad to see Google continuing to make those changes. And was there a Zoom classroom project or something like that they were doing that we talked about a while back? It seems like there was something that was really focused on education.
Yeah. And I think, and to be honest, I wouldn't doubt that. I'm assuming that they have,
It's it's class.com, the virtual classroom built on Zoom. And take attendance, hand out assignments, give a quiz, grade work, talk one-on-one. So it's a product by Class Technologies, but it looks like it's an add-on. I don't know. That may not be it, but I just visited with a friend who's in Florida. Because of construction, they're actually starting 2 weeks remote for their high school. They're not having to do that with the other grades. I think that's well timed with the Delta variant and COVID and everything like that. But who knows? We don't know what the future holds, and we could end up, needing to go remote. I think a lot of this is going to depend on, how many teachers we have get sick and go out. We can have kids go out and quarantine and whatever, but you've only got so many teachers and so many substitutes and that kind of thing like that. So don't forget those remote learning skills, folks. We all learned a lot of things in the last year and a half, and many of those things can help us in the face-to-face class, but we may need to do some remote things before the 21-22 school year is said and done. Time will tell.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. A couple more.
Yeah, one very quick one. We reported a couple weeks back that Windows is working on their next major new version of Windows. It's called Windows 11. And I have purposely not done this because I'm not looking for a distraction right now. But if you're someone that's curious about it, or you're an IT director where you're going to have to start making recommendations whether to stay with 10 or move to 11, there's lots of ways to get the free update because it is freely updatable from the current version of Windows 10. But you may want to start experimenting because there are beta versions available to allow you to download it right now and start to experiment with it. So I've read interesting reviews about it. Most of them have been positive, but just a warning that a shift is coming soon.
And a little back channel, going back to the previous article, Peggy's, offering that it doesn't sound too great to be, using your, a virtual environment, classroom management tool to stop interaction. That would be my thought is if we're going to Zoom or we're going to video conference with Meet or whatever, we need to be interactive, right? And if what you're trying to do is broadcast information, then make a video, record a podcast, do something, flip your learning. But hey, when we're interactive, it's important to be interactive. Yeah, I won't be downloading Windows 11. In fact, I don't know it. I don't know that I'm going to be doing anything with Windows ever, but who knows? Maybe I'll end up someday going to another school that's all Windows, but we kind of doubt
it. There it is. Okay, I think that's all I have for the week.
All right. That sounds good. Well, I think we just about covered all of the bases. So we're almost to the top of the hour here. I'll do my Geek of the Week real quick. I actually only have one, but this came from a video, which is like these 90-second updates that Google Education does. And they really are great. They're doing those monthly. This is called the Chromebook App Hub. So you can find this at chromebookapp.withgoogle.com. And I had never seen this before. There are a lot of different, websites, web apps that can be utilized with Chromebooks. Of course, these could also be, utilized in the Chrome browser or probably another browser as well. But the neat thing is you can look down on the left under filters. And so there's app categories. There's integrations and optimizations that you can look for. For instance, if you wanted to look for, collaborative tools, you can do that. Digital literacy, digital citizenship, typical math, social science, things like that, storytelling. But it just is fantastic. And it's an excellent collection of tools and resources. So check it out, the Chromebook App Hub.
Excellent. And then I want to share. This is a tip that I talk a lot about when I talk about helping students understand, or helping students understand how to be masterful users of the web. But almost every major browser, either by plugin or by native functionality, has what's called a reader mode, which takes a web-based article, it strips away most of the advertising, many of the distracting media components, and turns it into something that's relatively close to a nice, clean, printed page on your screen. And if you're sending kids out a lot to the web is built to keep you there and then send you on your way to other clicks, oftentimes to advertising. But if you can teach students that the best way to read the web is to see the article, process it through a reader mode, I think that's a really winning combination to provide masterful, tech-savvy advice to your students. And so I'm linking this week to a wonderful Lifehacker article that talks about this in detail and tells you on every browser what you would need to install to add a reader mode across the browser sphere.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, if you are hopefully using an ad blocker today, uBlock Origin is my blocker of choice. It's important to look at what your students are looking at, and they could be seeing an incredibly advertising, distracted, version of articles and videos and things like that. So one of the things I'll be teaching all my students soon is to add a uBlock Origin, and absolutely using a tool, like you said, that's going to go into a reader mode and strip out distractions, trying to be productive and minimize unwanted distractions in our lives. It's like that's a key for everybody. So very important tool. All right. Well, I guess I'm the host, so it's my turn to wrap it up. Dr. Neiffer, where can folks find you when you're not here on Wednesday nights?
Hey, best place to find me is Twitter, Tech Savvy Teach, and you, sir?
I am at W Fryer on Twitter, or you can go to my newly updated website, which rumor has may have some more updates coming soon, at westfryer.com. And I've got a connect link to link out to all of the places where I am sharing. So we want to thank everybody for being attentive. Thanks, Peggy, for being here live with us as always. We're sorry to hear about the flooding and too much rain in Arizona. Man, it's been crazy, but I'm thankful that we're getting some rain, and I'm especially thankful in Montana that those fires will hopefully be positively affected by the rain. So we want to encourage everybody to check out our show notes. You can find MP3 audio versions and smaller video versions of our show on edtechsr.com, as well as the show notes that we talked about in tonight's show. You can always subscribe to us on YouTube, and the best way to find out what's happening, because periodically we do take a week off here and there, is to follow us on Twitter, and that is at EdTechSR. So until next time, we encourage everybody to stay savvy, stay safe, and if you're a T-Mobile user, it's probably time to make some credit company contacts. Not to end on a low note, but hey, download Windows 11 for free. There's your good positive.